Before we begin, please subscribe and like this channel so you never miss a new true story. My daughter called me one Tuesday evening in March, her voice brighter than it had been in months. "Daddy," James proposed. "We're getting married in June." I remember sitting in my study, the leather chair creaking as I leaned back, and I felt that full warmth spread through my chest, the kind a father feels when his child finds happiness. I told her I was proud, that I loved her, and that I'd be there for everything. She asked if I could help with the wedding. Without hesitation, I said yes. That was before I knew what James really was, before I understood what he'd been planning all along. Let me tell you who I am first, because it matters to understand where I came from. My name is Bernard Hayes, and I built my life on discipline and integrity. I spent 40 years in commercial real estate in Atlanta, closing deals that transform neighborhoods, raising my daughter Maria after her mother and I divorced when she was 12, and earning the kind of reputation that meant something in this city. When I retired 5 years ago at 62, I had a portfolio of investments that threw off enough income to live comfortably, a restored Victorian house in Druid Hills that I'd renovated myself, and a daughter who'd gone to Spelman, gotten her master's in social work, and made me proud every single day. I was a man of routine, morning coffee on the porch, evening walks through the neighborhood, church on Sundays, monthly dinners with old friends. Quiet, stable, content. James Mitchell came into our lives through Maria. They met at a non-profit gala. He was charming, ambitious, worked in pharmaceutical sales, seemed to have his head on straight. He wore expensive watches, drove a Lexus, and talked about his 5-year plan with the kind of confidence that impressed people. Maria brought him to Easter dinner, and he spent the whole afternoon listening to my stories, asking good questions, complimenting my garden. I liked him. More importantly, I trusted him. That was my first mistake. When he proposed, I offered to help pay for the wedding. Maria insisted they could handle it themselves, but I volunteered for something else. I said I'd drive him to work every morning. He'd mentioned his car was in the shop, transmission problems, and staying in a hotel near my house while it was being repaired. I had the time, and it seemed like the kind of thing a father-in-law does. Every morning at 7:15, I'd pull around to the front of the house in my Lincoln, and he'd be waiting. We'd talk about work, the wedding plans, his family back in Charlotte. He seemed genuinely grateful. It was on a Tuesday in April, about 8 weeks before the wedding, that I learned the truth. I was waiting for him outside his office building, reading the paper. He came out with one of his colleagues, a man named Derek, and they stood right beside my car, not seeing me through the tinted windows. James was laughing, that easy, confident laugh I'd heard 100 times, and he said something that made Derek slap him on the back. "Man, you got this all figured out," Derek said. "Maria's sweet, her pops is loaded, and by next year you'll be running half that real estate portfolio. Smart move." James laughed again. "She doesn't even know I've got credit card debt up to my ears. Once we're married, her old man will bail me out. Guys like that always do. They can't say no to their daughters." Derek grinned. "That's cold, brother. Cold." I sat very still. I didn't turn my head. I didn't move. I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at nothing, and I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not immediately. Something colder, clearer, a kind of absolute certainty. When James got in the car, he was still smiling, still carrying that easy confidence. I drove him home and we talked about the weather, about a Braves game, about nothing that mattered. He had no idea that I'd heard him. That's the thing about people like James. They assume silence means acceptance. They think a calm man is a weak man. They don't understand that patience isn't passivity. Patience is a choice. I didn't tell Maria. Not yet. I didn't confront him or make a scene or do any of the things an angry man might do. Instead, I watched. Over the next 8 weeks, I drove him to work every single day, and I listened. I learned that he'd taken out a second mortgage on a condo he owned in Buckhead. I learned he had gambling debts, not huge, but significant. I learned he'd told Maria his family was coming to the wedding, when in fact his mother was estranged from him and hadn't spoken to him in 3 years. I learned that Derek had a wife, that James had actually been involved with her 2 years ago, that Derek didn't know and James thought it was hilarious. I learned more than I wanted to know about who James Mitchell really was. Meanwhile, I made phone calls, quiet ones. I called my lawyer. I called my accountant. I called Maria's mother, my ex-wife Patricia, who I'd maintained a cordial relationship with for the sake of our daughter. And I called my daughter, not to tell her what I'd heard, but to invite her to lunch. We sat at Sotto, the Italian place downtown where we'd celebrated so many of her milestones. She ordered her usual caprese salad and sparkling water. I ordered soup and coffee. I looked at her for a long moment, this woman I'd raised, and I said, "Maria, before this wedding happens, I need to know something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you happy? Not with the idea of getting married, with James. Are you genuinely happy with him?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. She said, "Dad, he's good. He makes me laugh. He has ambition." "That's not what I asked," I said quietly. She looked down at her plate. "No," she said finally. "Not really. Not like I thought I would be. But I'm 32, and I think maybe that's not realistic. Maybe real love is just quieter than we think." I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, honey. Real love is not quieter. Real love is brave, and you deserve brave." Then I told her everything. Not with anger or drama, just facts, dates, conversations I'd overheard, details about his debts and his lies. She got pale. She cried. And then, and I was proud of her for this, she got angry. The right kind of angry. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "I want you to decide," I said. "On your own, without me pushing, without any pressure from me except the truth." She called off the wedding the next day. She did it herself, with her own strength. James came to my house that evening furious, demanding explanations. That's when I told him what I'd done, calmly, in my study. I'd already had my lawyers send letters to the credit card companies and the bank that held his mortgage, informing them of discrepancies in his applications and requesting audits. I'd contacted his company's HR department, anonymously but thoroughly, with documentation of his affair with Derek's wife, which was enough to trigger a workplace investigation. I'd made sure his family connections, the ones he'd been counting on to help him climb the ladder, knew exactly who he was and what he'd been doing. Not publicly. Quietly. The kind of consequences that unfold slowly, that can't be traced back to one person, that just happened to destroy everything he'd been planning. "You had no right," he said, his face flushed with rage. "No," I agreed, my voice steady and quiet. "I had every right. You don't get to use my daughter. You don't get to lie to me. You don't get to make plans to steal from her. And you don't get to do it in my house, in my car, with me sitting 10 feet away." He left Atlanta 3 weeks later. His company let him go. His debts caught up with him. The woman he'd had the affair with, who'd forgiven him years ago, told Derek the truth. And their friendship ended. His mother, when he finally reached out, told him he'd burned his last bridge with her. Maria cried for about 2 weeks. Then she didn't. She spent the summer reading, spending time with friends, working on herself. 6 months later, she met someone at a charity event. A good man, a quiet man, a man who looked at her like she was the most important person in the room. They got married last year on a beach in Tybee Island, and I walked her down the aisle with my hand on her arm and pride in my heart. People sometimes ask me if I regret what I did. I don't. James made his choices, and I simply made sure those choices had consequences. I didn't break any laws. I didn't hurt anyone physically. I simply ensured that the truth came out, and I let the truth do what truth does. It leveled the playing field. I'm 67 now. I still take my morning coffee on the porch. I still walk through my neighborhood in the evenings. I still go to church on Sundays. The only thing that's changed is that now I know something I didn't before. Sometimes the quiet man, the patient man, the man who listens and watches and waits, is the most powerful man in the room. And sometimes love, real love for the people you care about, means doing the hard thing quietly, with dignity, and never asking for credit. That's what I did for my daughter, and I'd do it again. True story.